What's up, YouTube people? Shaggy the Writer coming at you live from the library once again. We only have 3 chapters left in the book, and we only have 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes until the library kicks me off of this computer automatically. So, without further ado, Chapter 20, Hope Springs Eternal. Welcome to the grand finale, y'all. I shambled back to the car, which was luckily still in the same place where I had left it. Stanley was not nearly as upset by the situation as I thought he would be. "We saw you try to jump right through the wormhole when it disappeared." "It was comedy," my counterpart added. I tried to ignore the anger that was building up inside of me. What made it harder was the fact that I knew both of my counterpart and Stanley had been drinking, even though Stanley had to drive the car to a safe location. I didn't say a word as I got into the back seat of the slider and slammed the door shut. Stanley just passed me the bottle. "Just take a few swigs, man. You'll be all right." Throwing caution to the wind, I tipped the bottle back and gulped down a good portion right then and there. I ignored the burning sensation for as long as I could, until I was certain that if I swallowed even one more time, the liquor would overpower my senses. The alternate me took the bottle off my hand and replaced it with a joint. "You probably need this too." I lit the spliff and inhaled deeply, allowing the smoke to penetrate my every fiber of being. I released my breath and coughed a deep cough for several seconds until the smoke was completely out. I could feel the alcohol and ganja begin to confuse my senses. It calmed my anger and soothed my soul. When half of the cigar was gone, Stanley grabbed it from my hand. I knew better than to be so selfish, but desperate times called for desperate measures. For a moment we sat in silence, and for that moment I was at peace. The other me finally broke the pause. "So, what do we do now?" I looked up and belched loudly, releasing a small amount of smoke which had been stuck inside of my stomach. "I don't give a fuck what we do now. We're gonna get killed by fucking monsters, and I'm stuck here to wait on them." Stanley looked at me with pity plastered across his face. "You really do need this more than I do." He placed the joint back into my hand. Again I smoked far too much at once. My rage slowly died and was replaced by inhibition. "We need to find a place to sleep. Do you think it's safe to head back to our parents' house?" "Not if the cop's still there," my counterpart scoffed. "What about Stanley's house?" Stanley quickly took his weed away for the second time. "Did I mention how much you already owe me?" The other me came up with an idea. "Maybe Jessica would be nice enough to let us crash." "No, she's still pissed at you for being awful," I explained. The other me was appalled, but Stanley was laughing. "You know, I might have some room for you at the crib. You can do me one favor first." "What's that?" The alternate me's car was parked just up the street from our parents' house. Even from a block up the street we could see the police parked all around the site, and we knew that reaching the goal without being caught would be a pain in the ass, especially in the waxing sunlight. I hopped out of the car with the alternate me's keys in my hand and made a mad dash for it. The feat made even more impressive by how inebriated I was. Without a single police officer being outside, I was able to get into the car without a hitch. There were 4 different police cars around the outside of the house, along with Rocky's car. The purple blood from 2 monsters was around the outside of the surveillance van we had seen earlier. All in all, if I wasn't drunk, this would have been terrifying. I looked through the inside of the car, carefully moving through the piles of refuse and ashes scattered all around the inside. Again, I thought of my car back home. It was spotless. Even though I would have normally found food waste and slop generally disgusting, I continued to dig without regard for my personal qualms. After a few minutes of searching, I finally found what I was looking for: a carefully hidden plastic bag containing at least 2 ounces of dangerously dank herbs, along with 4 massive Dutch majors. I marveled at the sight for just a second, impressed by the pretty green nuggets, which prior to today I hadn't smoked in quite some time. It was surprisingly glorious. I shimmied out of the car, accidentally kicking a few assorted wrappers out with me. In my state, I forgot about the importance of stealth. I slammed the car door after engaging the lock. Oops. I took off, sprinting back down the street, and made it almost to the car before a police officer leapt out of the house and took off after me. "Hey, you! Stop!" he shouted at me as he drew his weapon. I hopped into the car just before the officer could take aim. "Get the fuck out of here, Dredd." And with that, we somehow got away. Stanley was pleased that we could finally at least partially return his kindness. By the time we got back to his house, the man was barely capable of controlling his vehicle. He parked the car with his passenger side tires on the curb, stumbled out of the vehicle, and tossed the empty liquor bottle into the general direction of the trash can. It missed and smashed into 1,000 pieces in the street. "I told you folks we weren't gonna get to sleep until the fucking sun was up." Myself and I stumbled out of the car next. Both of us were barely capable of standing up, but that didn't stop the camaraderie. He sang a song and I sang one that sounded similar, and neither of us could actually care about how different we sounded. "Y'all need to be very, very, very quiet." Stanley placed a wobbly finger on his lips as if to emphasize his point. "My pops is sleeping and I ain't about to get kicked out because you want to act like jackasses. We should sit out here and burn one more on that big-ass front porch for old time's sake," the other me was quick to suggest. "No, you two need to shut the fuck up and pass out somewhere." "Oh, come on, Stanley," I chimed in. "Don't be a bitch about it." Stanley shook his head in disgust. "Fine, you two do whatever, but don't you dare make a sound if you ever get inside." I'm not entirely certain how long we sat out on the big front porch. The outdoor chairs were heavily padded and mostly dry, and by far the most comfortable thing in the world at the time. Previously, I'd been upset by how few trees there were standing on the usually wooded west side of town, but now I saw that the lack of trees was the secret to a perfect view of the city from this porch. The sun glinted off of the architecture a few miles away and provided us with a spectacular show. There we sat and smoked and watched as the sun slowly climbed above the gorgeous skyline. There was a feeling of happiness which slowly overtook me in my inebriated state as I watched the colorful sky. After all of the Dutch majors were gone, we had made a considerable dent in the bag. My counterpart looked to me and I looked at him. No words were verbally exchanged, but still a conversation was held. "You still worried about getting home?" "Right now I'm not worried about a thing." "I feel you there. Besides, the wormholes have kept coming back this whole time, right? So there'll probably be one more tomorrow, right?" "Hell yeah. Are you worried about the fight?" "Nah, man, I'm just worried about it getting up on time tomorrow." "True enough, it's close to 6:30 right now." "I guess it's tomorrow already." "Sure is." "Hey, just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't give up hope just because shit's bleak. I know it's an old saying, but it's always darkest before the dawn." "I don't want to hear that. I'm too sleepy for old people wisdom right now." "But it's true. You and I are the same. I know you can damn near do anything you set your mind to. No matter what happens, keep your head up." And with that we both went to sleep, the dreamless, alcohol-induced sleep we so craved. There was chapter 20 in 8 minutes. Now we're on chapter 21. Still got 27 minutes left before the library closes. Shouts out against the world. G, who been in the building. Uh, make sure everybody smash that like button. Chapter 21, and this is the finale. We only got 2 chapters left and we got 26 minutes to do it. I think we can do this. Chapter 21, The Fight. For almost 5 hours I slept. After the crazy ass day we had been through, it felt good to finally sleep. I knew the other me had got at least 3 hours before I was arrested last night, so he was a little better off than me when we woke up by Stanley's screaming father. "Good morning, freeloaders. Would either of you care to explain why you're on my porch?" I rubbed my eyes and looked up at the short, pudgy man standing in his doorway. "We slept here last night. Stanley is a grown-ass man. I ain't no reason he should be having sleepovers with his friends," Stanley's father snarled. The other me groaned. "5 more minutes." Nah, ain't no more minutes. Y'all can wake up and get off my porch." I kicked him with what I'm sure I looked at him with what I'm sure was a look of total disgust. "What time is it?" "Time for you to go away, JJ." I looked at my phone and realized that it was later than I'd hoped. The fight was in less than an hour and I wasn't prepared at all. I rose up from the chair and cracked my back. The liquor I drank hours earlier was still in my system and it really didn't feel good. I wanted to throw up, but my guts were stable. I can't say the same thing for the other me, though. As soon as he got up from the chair, his weak stomach forced another load of acid. He was barely able to make it to the side of the porch. Stanley's dad was even more salty now. "Oh no, my flower bed." "Sorry," the other me replied in an insecure, shaky way. "Get off of my property." I stared at the man. "I can't go anywhere until you wake Stanley." "Don't stare at me like that. I might not be the ultimate fighter, but I swear to God no one has ever made me look like a fool and gotten away with it." The elder persisted. Lucky for us, Stanley was woke by his dad's shouts. He walked outside and groaned. "Dad, why are you trying to intimidate my friends? These kids sleeping on my porch without my permission, and I won't stand for it." When Mr. Williams began to really raise his voice, it sounded like knives being driven into my eardrums. "Dad, I'm about to take them somewhere right now if you just let it go." The old white-haired man gave me a dirty look. "They ain't off of my porch in the next 10 minutes. I'm gonna whoop them both." And with that he went back into his house. Stanley waited for him to go inside before pulling up a chair and sitting down. He rubbed his forehead and spoke a little bit softer now. "Please tell me you didn't smoke all of the herbs." I pulled out the bag, which still had a good ounce or so inside, and showed him. "We're out of cigars, though." "Don't worry about that." He pulled one out of his pocket and showed us proudly. "I always keep a couple of them around, but please roll up quickly. I don't know how long he's going to stay inside." I broke down the cigar and replaced the tobacco inside with my great green ganja. Then I carefully twisted up the roll, completed in only a few minutes. Stanley handed me a lighter and I sparked it up. The taste of smoke woke up all of my senses and made me feel ready to take on the day. I tried to I tried to pass the joint to the other me. "No more of that shit," he quickly responded. I handed it to Stanley. He took a few puffs and handed it back. "So, where do we have to go for this fight today?" Maybe 10 minutes away from downtown was the Cincinnati Gardens, an old arena known for different mid-level events. The parking lot was packed full of people, but I didn't see a single cop car. There were just a few security people lurking around. We walked toward the packed palace and looked for the event staff. I found my way to the sign-up table where one lone woman was sitting there with a clipboard. "I should be on the list." "Name?" asked the clipboard with the woman attached. "Jason James." "Hang on a second." She looked over the list for a moment, then suddenly her eyes got huge. "Oh my! It looks like you're supposed to fight John Patel." "Do you have good life insurance?" "I ain't got no fucking insurance." "Well, whatever, it's your funeral." When we got inside, I saw Rocky standing next to Jessica and my parents. They were all waiting for me, and they all looked nervous. Rocky was bruised around his neck, as well as a little bit pissed off at me for almost being late. "What the hell took you so long?" "We almost slept through it after the shit we had to deal with last night." "No one wants to hear about the shit you had to deal with last night. Your father and I had to fight off 3 aliens by ourselves," Rocky explained. "Real cops and friends examined the remains of the aliens and took our side pretty quickly too, but they still didn't leave us alone until about 7 or so in the morning. Apparently someone shot up the FBI building or else we'd all be under surveillance still." The other me looked at him nervously and reached out his hand. "You don't know how much I have to thank you for answering my call last night. No, you don't know how much I want to kill you for making me leave my bed at 3 a.m. to go fight a goddamn monster. One of them almost choked me out until your dad came out of the house with a gun." Rocky's hands shook as he spoke. My surprisingly calm dad looked more than a little bit proud. "I shot that monster clean from 15 yards out with its friend's gun." Rocky still looked mad. "Look, man, I'm gonna hold this against you until the day you die, but before we get into reparations, I have to ask if you brought gloves." Uh, yeah, that's what I thought." He pulled out a pair of blue regulation gloves from his book bag and gave them to me. "Tape your hands. Put these on. Leave your shirt and shoes with us and get into that ring before they disqualify you." I went to take my shoes off and shirt, revealing a few tattoos that both my parents and my alternate self weren't happy about or aware of. I taped my hands, slid on the gloves, and made my way towards the ring. Jessica stopped me before I could get very far, put a hand on my shoulder, and spoke over the noise of the crowd. "I swear if you win this fight, JJ, I will Then she whispered in my ear the things we were going to do. I'll be damned if a smile ain't creep up on my face right then and there. After a miraculously successful weigh-in, I stood in the middle of the octagon-shaped cage. Across from me was a tiny man who had been feared by so many. I was wearing a pair of plain blue basketball shorts and some matching gloves. His were red with a black design and a few logos plastered on them. It was like some of the sponsors had already wanted this kid before he could even get in the league. The referee walked into the middle of the ring and both of us followed. We touched gloves and backed away from each other without a single word spoken between us. The fight was on. For a moment we just circled around the ring, each waiting for the other to make his first move. Then without warning, Patel charged in. I swung my right foot in an attempt to force him away. With a single feat of brute strength, the man I outweighed by nearly 10 kilos was able to take the kick and still spear me in the middle. He took me to the ground, and even with my legs wrapped around his midsection and my arms in front of my face, the man used his fists and elbows to inflict several pass punches to my stomach. I screamed as I felt one of his elbows smash into my rib, but still I caught his arm. With all of the strength I could muster, I flipped the man off me and into the steel cage. Before he could move, I crawled to him and rammed my knee into his side 3 times until the smaller man was able to smash his fist into my jaw. For a second I saw stars and backed off. Again we both stood up and faced each other, but this time I saw that he respected me. I threw him a left jab. He blocked my punch and quickly came in for the counter, again landing punishment to my jaw. For the first time, I heard the man speak. "You cannot win this fight by brute strength alone. Could have fooled me." For 3 more rounds we kept at it, trading punches and kicks until my sides were numb and my face was in constant pain. His perfect calm had been replaced by anger and determination. From what everyone said about this Patel guy, he had never had an opponent last this long before. I knew that as long as the fight was still going on, I had a chance to win. I watched as he swung his foot at my face. I caught his leg while it was in mid-swing and began to lift up. Then out of nowhere, he used my lift to boost the power of his other foot and flip-kicked me in my already damaged mouth. I heard a pop followed by a high-pitched whine, but for that moment I only knew anger. He charged in for one more punch, and I caught his fist. With my vision blurred and blood leaking from my mouth, I was able to use the leverage to force him to the ground. Through some kind of superhuman feat, I held him in an armbar. He was resilient and repeatedly punched my inner thigh, causing a nasty Charlie horse. I screamed, and so did he. The whole crowd waited. Then the unexpected happened. The final bell rang without Patel tapping out. The referee pulled us off of each other and escorted us to separate corners. My ribs felt like they were broken. My face was bruised and swollen. The blood gushing out of my mouth was enough to paint the floor red. The medical examiner on site warned me to sit down, but for that moment I only wanted to continue fighting. I finally calmed down and sat down. The medical examiner said it was miraculous that I had lasted that long, but I knew I was capable of doing more. I looked out at the crowd and saw my cheering section, and boy were they cheering. My mother was the loudest of them all, too. I could hear her voice above the constant screams echoing off the walls of the arena. I thought it was funny that she had had her hands over her eyes for most of the fights. I looked to where Patel was standing on his side of the ring. Out of respect, the iron-willed Indian bowed deeply to me. In my post-fight haze, I waved back. Lord knows I wasn't about to try and stand up again to do the same. Then I looked back to the crowd, who unanimously wanted more. I saw the sponsors in their suits and ties making phone calls. Most of them were excited about what they had seen and knew that I had impressed them, even if I needed a trip to the hospital afterwards. I looked at Rocky. He looked at the suits and looked back at me to mouth the words, "You owe me." I knew he would probably win his fight today, but he still wanted a piece of my action. I didn't blame him either. He had set all this up after all. And I looked to myself. He had said last night that he would have never thought of himself as a professional MMA fighter, but in his universe, he hadn't excelled at all the different martial arts as a kid either. I knew that he felt my success was his as well, and this made him happy. For that moment, I felt content. Then I looked to the back of the stands and saw something disturbing. A bunch of police had showed up right then and there, and they were making their way to the ring. I know the FBI building had some kind of closed-circuit TV, but they were still chasing me to look for answers. I looked out to myself once more. Get the fuck out of here. Now. That's chapter 21. We still got just over 15 minutes left. Shouts out. Faux gang. Part faux. F-O-E-E. Family over everything every time. Motherfuckers, it's faux. We're not doing a whole lot of shout outs tonight. I'm going to dive right into chapter 22 and see if we can't get this whole thing done before the library closes in 14 minutes and 35 seconds. Chapter 22, Wormholes. I looked to my counterpart while he bled profusely and smiled with bright crimson painted teeth. The fight was going to come down to the judges, and he had almost certainly lost. But just being able to last an entire fight with someone who had never had an opponent last 3 rounds was pretty incredible. He was basking in the moment. I was equally thrilled for him. That was his goal this whole time, to improve our lives and create a better existence for ourselves. I knew that life was good. I looked around, overwhelmed by all the screaming fans in the arena, when suddenly my mind was bombarded by my counterpart's thought projection. Get the fuck out of here now. I looked at him with disbelief as he sat there and bled without making eye contact with me. I thought back, why? 12 is here, man. What is? I began to ask, but when I looked to the other side of the arena, I saw the police officers filing in from every direction. Without being too conspicuous, I stood up and made my way toward the back. Somehow the area directly behind me was the only one completely free from police, so I made my way up the Coliseum stairs and towards the exit. I was almost to the top when suddenly an officer was there. I should have known that it was too easy, but I regrouped quickly. I saw an overweight man who was maybe a few years older than me shouting at the octagon. "Come on, you pansies, don't let him stop you, keep fighting." I saw the beer in his hand and recognized my opening. With one quick shove, I forced the beer out of the man's hand and then moved just slightly out of the way, just as a wild-looking teenager made his way up the stairs. Without saying a word, the fat guy swung on the kid. The kid was equally amped up by the fight, so he was quick to throw a punch back. From there, a few more people were bumped and nudged and eventually joined in the rapidly growing brawl. Oh my god, why am I breaking up at the last chapter? In what seemed like a chain reaction, the entire arena erupted in a slew of violence and destruction. The riot proved to be an ample distraction, as the police were quick to spring into action and avoid their goal of apprehending me. I was able to casually walk out the front door without a hitch. I walked to the bus stop and sat down with little consideration for anyone else who might have needed a seat. With only $2 in my pocket, I was going to find somewhere to regroup. Then all of a sudden my wormhole radar began to go off. It had yet to go off at such a convenient time, but I wasn't going to question the luck. I looked on the device and saw on the screen that the wormhole was downtown. I'm sure that the other people at the bus stop were creeped out by my reaction as I let out an audible cheer as soon as I knew for sure. But again, I cared very little. The bus arrived only a few minutes later, leading me to believe that my luck had finally turned around. I was going to get home. I rode on the bus with an honest-to-God smile on my face as it traversed the streets of Bond Hill and Norwood. It made a few stops as we went, but every time a wormhole had opened up, it had lasted for a good hour. The professor had mentioned that was the machine's maximum runtime, and surely enough, he was running the thing for as long as he possibly could. It took about 25 minutes to get to the city with minimal traffic and less stops than usual. After all, it was a drizzly Saturday morning, and no one had to be anywhere for any reason in particular. As we got to the city center, the sky seemed to open up. A torrential downpour and powerful wind rocked the bus while it traversed the one-way streets. I stepped out of the bus on a very soggy version of Fountain Square, with the signal still strong and my goal still clear. I quickly recognized that something wasn't right. I noticed that dozens of people looked up in the air in spite of the rain stinging their eyes. They stared at the top of a skyscraper diagonal to the square. There, seemingly hanging more than 500 feet in the air beside some crude tower, was the wormhole, which was still visible through the thick cloud cover. This time it was golden for some reason. Once inside, I hurried past the security guards who were busy manning phones into the elevators. From there, I made my way to the 45th floor where all of the signs said the observation deck was. I continued to follow the signs until I got to an area where a stairwell led up 5 more stories to the roof. The only problem was that instead of the usual private security guards, there was a fully fledged policewoman blocking off a group of tourists from the roof access. "Oh, come on, lady, we want to see the glowing spiral thingy." A man tried to get around the woman. She wasn't very tall or imposing of a woman, but her surprisingly wide form was definitely more than large enough to block access to the stairs effectively. "No one's going up there until we can find what's going on. We're here on vacation from Pittsburgh. You have to let us see this thing," the man scoffed. "No, I don't, because that thing is not supposed to be up there. It's spitting lightning in every direction, and there's more than enough metal up there to kill you," the officer tried to explain. The group let out a collective groan and still refused to disperse. The officer's exceptionally pretty face was flushed with anger and also exhaustion. Judging by how her stomach protruded out further than her bosom, it was safe to assume that she didn't deal with stress well. The stress, along with a distinct lack of air conditioning, was causing her to slowly lose her mind. I regretfully decided to once again exploit the situation. I stepped forward into the group and said, "Don't let this woman tell you what's dangerous and what isn't. She isn't a scientist. She can't tell you what that thing is." The group began to stir and the officer began to panic. "Calm down. Please, everybody, calm down." The man from Pittsburgh was quick to say, "He's right." Then something unexpected happened. The woman looked at me with her doleful eyes and recognized that I was not a tourist. With a sudden jerk, she lunged for me and barely missed and fell, not quite hard enough to cause herself harm. The woman was splayed out on the floor, propped up by her own engorged stomach, when she pointed at me and screamed, "That man is a terrorist. Please stop him." And with that, I leapt over her and made a beeline for the final stairwell. 10 flights of stairs later, I made it to the observation deck with an angry mob nipping at my heels. I ran past a small gift shop where another officer was seated. He was quite a bit larger than the woman downstairs and also quite a bit slower to action. He was still seated when he said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be up here." I ignored the massive slob of a man and quickly found a broom placed near the doorway to the observation deck. Before the man could even get up, and before the mob could close in, I made my way outside and used the broom to barricade the inward opening door. It was temporary, but that was all I needed. The rooftop was always open to visitors during the hours of daylight for a nominal fee, but today it was completely deserted for obvious reasons. I walked unimpeded to the side of the soaking wet building and looked out. There, maybe 2 feet below the top of the high wall of the observation deck, and 3 feet out, was the glowing golden portal, which shot lightning bolts and hail in all directions. Now I faced one final challenge, my fear of heights. I slowly backed away from the electrified metal rail guarding the top of the concrete ledge. My breathing became sporadic. I trembled at the abnormally hot torrents of rain. I could feel my heart racing from just the prospect of jumping off of a building this tall with no parachute or safety harness of any kind. If somehow this wormhole dissipated mid-jump like the other one on top of the old automotive plant, I knew that the fall would kill me. I looked behind me and saw the broom handle was beginning to crack. The mob was going to tear that door open at any moment, and there I was about to face death regardless. I can assure you that I was close to tears while I weighed my options. The mob then made the decision for me. The door flung open and 15 angry people burst through. 2 officers were obviously enraged. They ignored the wholly unsafe crowd, drew their pistols, and began to point them in my direction. This was when I ran. I slipped briefly on my initial approach as I took off at full speed toward the small metal railing that sat on top of the concrete wall surrounding the area. In one bound, I leapt off the side of the building, while lightning struck the railing less than half a second after my unsteady jump. I could hear the gunshots ring out behind me as I leapt. I closed my eyes tightly after I jumped, and for a few nanoseconds I was completely terrified. Then I finally felt it happen. the trans-universal jolt, and I knew that I was home free. I might have been crying tears of joy when I felt myself slide feet first along the cold tiled floor of the college science building. I was in the laboratory, the same lab with the same giant machine and the same detached control panel. The room was foggy, and the indoor atmosphere unstable, just as it had been when I left. There behind a bulletproof glass shield was Professor Percival Jones. I threw up, per usual, even though there seemed to be nothing in my stomach to expel. I know I looked quite a mess between the tears and the snot beginning to run down my nose as a result of those tears and the vomit still dripping off of my chin, but I just didn't care. I rolled over to my stomach and began to kiss the only untouched section of the tile floor. It was the happiest stomachache of my life. We made it. We did it. The Nobel Prize is ours, Professor. Through my tears of joy, I couldn't see very well at first. Then I noticed that something wasn't right. The professor wasn't coming towards me. He didn't have anything to say about the prize or the publicity or the money. He was simply staring at me with an expression of shock and disbelief. I looked at him. His deep brown eyes looked back at me. For a moment, neither of us said the word. When he finally broke the silence, it was only to say, "You're not Kenny Lucas." I hope y'all cut some of them details there at the very end. But that is it. That is it. That is my complete audiobook for Adventures in the Multiverse, shot at 2 separate locations, the Basement Dungeon and the Anderson Township Library. So once again, huge shouts out to Against the World G for showing up. Shouts out to Don't Watch Continue, Dot Rose, all my various Discord peeps, Marie and them, Raheem and Brittany and them. I know it's more people that I'm not thinking of, but we've only got like 2 minutes left until the library kicks me off of the computer automatically. So shouts out to Poe and them. Shouts out to Against the World G one more time for being my awesome cover artist. Don't forget to like, share, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. We out for the evening. My audiobook is complete. Faux Faith, NFA Gang, one love.